Hello, I'm John Janarone, Editor-in-Chief of PE Edge. Very happy to be back at the New York Stock Exchange with another one of our friends from Vinson and Elkins. We have Jeffrey Jakubiak, who's a partner at V&E. Jeffrey, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
So, Jeffrey, we're going to talk about the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission first. Can you tell us, for those who are uninitiated, what it's all about and what that body does?
Certainly. So the FERC, as we call it, is a up to 5-member commission appointed by the president of people of both parties. It regulates oil, gas, and electric energy. More particularly oil pipelines, gas markets, and pipelines, and really everything in the electric space, from wholesale electric power sales to electric transmission lines, which are the big lines you see going down the highway.
Gotcha. I want to focus on the electricity part, right? So we've all heard a lot about energy deregulation over the last 10 or 20 years. How is that actually shaking out?
Deregulation is a bit of a misnomer. In the last 20 years, we've seen regulation of a different nature. They've gone from traditional cost-based pricing of electric power to market-regulated pricing in trading markets like we have in the New York Stock Exchange. But electric transmission lines are very much cost-based regulated still, just like it was 80 years ago when the law really started.
So those towers and poles, that's what we're talking about, right? Where the power's getting to your house, if it's not underground, it's up in the air. Is that what we're discussing?
Exactly.
Okay.
The transmission lines are the big ones on the big steel towers, in big fields, down the highway, to be distinguished from the distribution lines, which are the smaller ones down your local street on what people call telephone poles, which are the wood ones.
I've got to tell you a personal anecdote. I live in Florida where it gets very hot in the summer, and sometimes my power bill is astoundingly high, And yes. I'm wondering, if this is a free market, could I be getting a better rate? Because it's Florida Power and Light, FPL, right? So from the consumer's perspective, it's pretty monopolistic still, isn't it?
It can be in some states. Okay. Florida is one of those states that hasn't deregulated the sale of electric energy at retail.
Yeah.
Now remember, you're paying a retail rate, you're not paying a wholesale rate.
Yeah.
The wholesale rates govern what Florida Power and Light purchases from if they don't generate it themselves. And there are markets in the New England states, in the Mid-Atlantic, in the Midwest, where really all the utilities buy from the markets. They divested their generation. There was a big move to divest generation in the late 90s, early noughts.
Yeah.
And these utilities buy from the markets. And the customers there see a direct pass-through of the market prices. But by the same token, even though you may be paying a high rate in Florida for these retail regulated rates, you may be paying a high rate in New England because, quite frankly, power prices are high. There's a squeeze, there's a lack of generation. It's a pretty wide-known fact in the business. The lights almost went out last winter and the winter before that. There just isn't enough generation if it gets really cold.
You just published or co-authored a report. Can you tell us a bit about that since you spent so much time? I took a look at it myself, but for those who haven't read it yet.
Yeah, certainly. So it's a report on our best predictions, my practice group's best predictions on what FERC is going to do in the electric space.
Yeah.
I would characterize 2024 as the year of transmission.
Okay.
Transmission is very important. It's maybe some people think the most boring part of electricity.
Yeah.
Prices don't change much, but it's how you get energy to the house.
Yeah.
It just like superhighways, you can't get from A to B, driving on local roads, except you want to do it really inefficiently. You want to get power moved around efficiently, it's electric transmission. And that's what needs to be built and maintained, particularly to move all the new generation from wind plants, from solar plants, whether onshore or offshore, to the user. And the grid wasn't designed that way. The transmission grid was designed 30s, 40s, 50s to move power from coal, gas plants in the middle of nowhere to cities. But that's not where we're siting wind or solar. We site it where it's most windy, where it's sunniest.
Yeah.
And that requires new superhighways, as it were. But it's really expensive to build transmission. And FERC realizes it, Department of Energy realizes it, Congress realizes it, and a lot has to be done. And finally, things are getting done. I think more is going to be done this year.
All right, and what about returns on equity? I think you also discussed that in the piece.
Right, returns on equity are fairly viewed as the pure profits that utilities are going to earn on their transmission lines.
Yeah.
By and large, utilities earn just what it costs to run the electric transmission, to build it, maintain it, and operate it. They get a recovery of their actual operations and maintenance costs. They get a recovery of their actual debt. ROE is set by FERC, usually through a settlement proceeding, maybe litigation, but it is the pure profit recognized. So it's the pure incentive to build transmission. If ROE isn't high enough, utilities are going to deploy their capital elsewhere. problem we face now is that FERC's policy for how ROE is established mathematically is in flux. And it has been in flux for over 10 years now. And I think FERC's going to have to do something very soon to set what the ROE policy is if utilities are going to have certainty and know whether they want to invest or not.
And among your clients, who does all this impact the most? I mean, we talk about these monopolies like FPL. I assume, are you working more with clients in more deregulated markets?
I work with clients all over the United States and actually some in Canada, and it's impacting everybody. A lot of transmission is still owned by traditional utilities.
Okay.
Even if they divested their generation, they still by and large own the wires.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of private equity that's getting into electric utility operations and investing in it. And private equity in particular is very sensitive to returns and very sensitive to profitability. They need to know what the ROEs are going to be. FERC recognizes this, and there have been some court cases that have been remanded back to FERC. FERC is going to act on them soon, we hope, one of our predictions this year, and provide some certainty as to how these profits are going to be set for transmission lines.
Jeffrey, if I can, I'm just thinking of something. I've interviewed a number of companies in the solar panel, electric vehicle, battery space, and something that I hear a lot about, which sounds exciting, and I wonder if it impacts the grid, is the idea of actually, if you have too much power from your car or from your solar panels, you can actually put it back onto the grid. Right. Is this something that is realistically going to impact your world and your clients? I mean, it sounds really cool to me, but when I'm talking to someone like you, I wonder, does this come up in conversation?
It does, and it is impacting my clients. Like I said about the need for new solar plants, new hydroelectric plants, new wind plants requiring new transmission to be built, by the same token, these charging stations require new transmission to be built. I mean, it's easy to think about the charging station just connecting to local distribution lines, and it's easy to build that, what we call the last mile. But when you get a lot of those in place, you have to build new transmission lines. And the backfeed onto the grid, as we call it, when you have extra power in your car, also creates these changes in flows that really haven't been managed or predicted or planned for.
Just one other question that reminds me in the same area. If you're driving up and down the eastern seaboard here, like I probably could have driven here from Florida with an electric car, no problem. I could have stopped and found charging stations. Right. Other parts of the country, no way. Is that going to change in the next couple of years? I mean, is there enough impetus to go out there and make that a possibility?
There is, definitely, and utilities are looking at all over the place. It's part of their planning processes for every utility I talk to. How are they going to manage charging stations? They're not going to build them necessarily themselves, but they're going to have to provide the hookups, they're going to have to provide the distribution lines and the transmission lines to make sure the power can get to these charging stations.
All right, one last question, Jeffrey, if I can just put it to you. In the next year or so, what's the most exciting change in your world that you're focused on, that you see happening? You can make a prediction if you like, or just tell me what everyone's buzzing about.
Private equity getting into transmission. There's a lot of money in private equity sitting on the sidelines, wants to be in the energy business. A lot of it is definitely investing in solar and wind plants. I think a lot of it is going to be investing in transmission. It's not going to provide the high yields that you may have seen in some of the renewable power plants, but it's a very, very steady and good return.
All right, Jeffrey, this has been really interesting and enlightening. So thanks for joining us here at the New York Stock Exchange. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
This has been Jeffrey Jakubiak, who's a partner at Vinson and Elkins. I'm John Janarone signing off from the New York Stock Exchange.